Yes, you read that right. This tool right here totally ruins what could have been a 10 out of 10 horror game. The atmosphere is dark and gritty, the environment is immersive, and can be downright breathtaking at times. Even the character building and voice acting is one of the best I've seen in a horror game in quite a while. But the gameplay is just so bare bones and lackluster, being riddled with quicktime events and repetitive platforming, along with the story not coming to a satisfying conclusion. And you'll find that it all starts with this screwdriver. So that's why today we're going to look at the story and gameplay and see how this screwdriver affects the overall quality of this game. So with that said, make sure to stab the bell icon so you don't miss out on future videos like this one, and let's get right into the world of Still Wakes the Deep. So when you first start the game, you play as Kaz, who's working on an oil rig called Bira D. You learn from Susan's letter that he is actually on the run from the police, and if he doesn't return home, she'll call for a divorce. And after reading this very lovely Christmas letter, Kaz goes out and makes his way to the canteen. And along your way, you come across Finley and make small talk, finding out that your boss Rennick got a letter from the mainland and now knows why you're here. After this, you make your way into the canteen and talk with Roy, a very close friend of Kaz's, and the one that got him into this oil rig job as an electrician. You walk around a bit and talk with all the workers, but quickly get called to Rennick's office. So Kaz goes out and makes his way to Rennick. But you find out from Scooby that the crew lift is broken, and hands you the screwdriver to fix the fuse, which we'll get back to later. Once fixed, you head up and finally meet with your very lovely and thoughtful boss, Rennick.
Shut your gob, you Ned prick!
He quickly yells at you, and you find out he knows all about the situation with you and the police. Because of this, Rennick, understandably so, fires him, and you are forced to leave the rig. But while doing so, you hear a loud explosion from the drill, and the whole rig starts violently thrashing, causing you and George to fall into the ocean. Thankfully, Kaz gets saved, but bigger matters are at hand. The oil rig is unstable, and this plant-like monster is infecting each section of the rig. This sets the tone for the rest of the story, involving Kaz to go and find a way out and to keep the oil rig from falling apart and exploding. While doing this, you'll come across all sorts of horrifically mutated coworkers that want you dead. But unfortunately, towards the end, no one survives, with Finley telling Kaz to destroy the monster once and for all by blowing up the whole oil rig to prevent the monster from spreading farther. And that's really where the game ends. So now that you have a general understanding of the story, let's rewind all the way back to when Scooby hands Kaz the screwdriver. Up until this point, the game mechanics consisted of your typical run-of-the-mill walking sim. You're able to move around, crouch, run, look behind you, and even lean left or right. Along with this, you're able to interact with certain objects placed around the environment. Again, nothing too crazy for a walking sim. But when Scooby hands you that screwdriver, it's essentially your go-to item for almost everything. You'll find yourself using it to repair certain machinery throughout the game, break locks to open doors, and even undo vent covers to get through certain areas of the rig. This screwdriver is the main focus when it comes to the gameplay. Everything else can be sent up to your usual run and hide type of formula, but on a much simpler scale. There are only a handful of free roam parts where you're actively hiding from a monster and trying to get past it. These small moments in the game consist of you going from vent to vent and throwing small objects to distract the monster. It's surprisingly easy, and worst of all, you always know where the monster is. You can hear its loud tentacles banging on pieces of metal, and it gives away its location straight away. Especially since the monster doesn't have a lot of space to free roam. The level of engagement isn't very high, and you'll find this being very true for most of the gameplay. And it doesn't help that there is an insane amount of platforming that involves a lot of quicktime events that take you out of the game. You'll find a lot of moments where you have to hold a button or hold the joystick in a certain direction to simply hold, pick up, or do any task within the game. And I know this may not seem like a big deal, but having an icon telling you what to do for almost everything is like putting a big sign in the middle of the screen and telling the player you're, well, playing a game. This makes it very hard to stay immersed because you're constantly being told that it's just a game. And it's not like it can't be immersive. The atmosphere and level design is genuinely amazing and really gets you into what it feels like working at an oil rig. The environment is super detailed, and I can only imagine how terrifying this game would be in VR. But all that work goes to waste when it's simply ruined by these icons popping up for the simplest of movements over and over again. And you'd think since you're a mechanic, you'd have a bunch of fun puzzles that deal with machinery and putting it back together, utilizing the screwdriver in a fun way. But nope, instead almost every task is literally displayed in full detail, and making it more confusing when in reality all you have to do is take out a couple pins and pull the lever. When it comes to the gameplay, there's not much, and the screwdriver acts as a cheap way to having interesting gameplay. In a lot of ways, Still Wakes the Deep reminds me a lot of the Outlast franchise. It's like a fun horror ride, but the difference between Outlast is it knows what it wants to be. When you play an Outlast game, you expect a lot of running and hiding, a lot of gore, and some fun jump scares. But with Still Wakes the Deep, it wants to take it slow with its gameplay, but also have this exciting aspect of being chased and having the story about Kaz and Suze's relationship during this traumatic time. But the way they're implemented together just doesn't work very well. For example, similar to Outlast, you're able to hide in lockers to avoid being seen by the monster. But it's almost useless because it's far better using the many vents given to you and distracting the monster with the items. Where if you were to hide it in the lockers, you can barely see where it is, and worst of all, can't distract it if it's near you. However, with Outlast, it works, because after a while the monster will slowly walk away, and you have this big free roam area to play around in. But Still Wakes the Deep isn't like that. Now, I know a lot of people say that it should be expected to have simpler gameplay, since it's made by the Chinese Room, a studio well known for its walking sim mechanics. But there's a big difference between their other games and Still Wakes the Deep. Put it simply, the story does not do a good job at keeping the player engaged, and doesn't have a satisfying conclusion. I think it's fair to say that with the studio, its qualities are in its atmosphere and storytelling. But in this game, the storytelling doesn't meet those expectations. Because of this, the lackluster gameplay is more noticeable. Again, I think the screwdriver, funny enough, kinda symbolizes the problems with the story, because it focuses so much on fixing things. Kaz spends so much time trying to fix the rig that it totally forgets about the monsters and what its motives are. From getting the generator back on, to engaging the tension winches to stop the rig from tipping over, then having to fix the flare so the rig doesn't explode, and finally flood the front platoons to stop the rig from again tipping over and causing an explosion. You do all this work being the errand boy, only for Finley and Kaz to blow up the whole rig, killing everyone on it. It leads to this very unsatisfying ending because for some reason, the story wants to focus more on fixing the rig rather than making an escape route or learning more about the monster that's literally killing everyone. Instead, the story is more interested in Kaz and Suze's relationship and how they're dealing with Kaz's criminal actions. The game never explains what the monster is, what his motives are, and how people get infected by said monster. For example, the newbie in the diving bell Raph was turned into a monster, meaning you don't need to be in contact with this thing to mutate. The diving bell was in perfect condition. Then later you hear about Gibbo coming into contact with some oil-like substance that caused him to mutate and be violent. Which makes you wonder how the hell Raph got infected in the first place, since again there was no sign of contact with this monster. Then later on, Rennick mutates while driving the helicopter, which explains why he lost control of it and crashed into the rig. A little later you find him horribly mutated. And farther in, you encounter O'Connor being infected by this thing and see a little of the process of how they get those long tentacles. But you get what I'm saying here, it's hard to know what the process actually is of them getting mutated. Each victim tells a slightly different story. It could be that it's a little bit of everything. We do see Kaz having hallucinations, with him hearing Suze over the phone, and later when exploring. This could mean that you just have to be around it in order to get infected. But then why did Kaz, Finley, and Brody not turn sooner? Almost everyone else is mutated, so what makes them so special? I think the biggest plot hole for me is if this plant-like monster was really planning on growing and expanding its reach, why not just infect the seagulls that fly around the rig? From time to time, you can actually find dead seagulls on the floor, so they are most definitely around. And let's not forget there is a whole ocean filled with marine life and other mammals. So why does it only go for humans? Is this monster's goal to really expand and infect others? If that were the case, it would infect all life forms, not just humans, right? This is what I mean, it's like the farther you try figuring out how this monster works, the more plot holes you find. And it's like the Chinese Room didn't spend time fleshing out this monster and how it works, because you find so many contradicting details in the game. It's really odd because Kaz actually gets these weird flashbacks, seemingly caused by the monster, but these flashbacks are very repetitious, with almost all of them showing Susie and Kaz arguing more about his crimes at the bar. You never get a flashback of the actual incident or something explaining more about the monster. Hell, the flashbacks themselves aren't even explained. I'd assume it's from the monster, but what's the motive in showing flashbacks of him arguing with his wife? I think the ending was such a huge slap in the face because while playing, you're so intrigued by the monster and what it is, that when you finally get to the end, you're expecting to gain some important information about the monster. But in reality, you just get a flashback of when Kaz left to work at the oil rig. You're sitting there like, why? Why show me something I already know? There's no big twist, no big aha moment, nothing in value is being added from this flashback. And almost all of them are like this. The only good thing about the story is the introduction of the monster and the mutated coworkers, along with the character building with Roy, Kaz, Finley, and maybe Brody. Don't get me wrong, there are some good parts in the story in this first half, but everything after kind of falls apart and feels so stagnant. I have a strong feeling that the Chinese room didn't really know where they wanted the story to go. It's like it's trying to tell both the monster story and Kaz and Sue's story at the same time, but didn't know which one to focus on more. This story could have landed so much better. For example, Kaz could try to get rid of the monster to fix the problem, and have Finley and Brody fix the rig instead. That way we get to know more about the monster and what it wants. The flashbacks could have been kept the same, but go more into the family side, to show the player why he needs to make it home, showing the importance of Kaz's daughters. He needs to be there for his family and to make amends. This would work far better than continually telling the player that Kaz and Susie are arguing because of what Kaz did, and how he's running away from the police. The player already understands that with the letter given to Kaz. It's clear as day, there's no need to explain farther other than going into more detail on the assault charges. This would make the ending far more satisfying and make the story more engaging. This game is a hit and a miss. There will be times where you're just in awe of the breathtaking environments and voice acting, and there will be times when you get bored or feel unsatisfied with it from the gameplay and storytelling. Especially towards the end, you can really feel the story dragging its feet with pacing feeling just a bit too long. Still Wakes the Deep is just okay, but what do you think? Did you enjoy it or was it a fail in your eyes? All that said, if you enjoyed this video and need more Devilish content, check out my Patreon and explore the nightmare fuel of digital exclusives. Or check out my recent video of Soma where I go into why it's one of the best psychological horror games to date. With that said, see you next time.